I'm Keri Blackwell. I'm a program officer for LISC in Chicago. Thank you all very much for choosing to spend time with us today. I know there's amazing work happening in the Bay Area and Duluth and certainly throughout the Rural LISC network. So we do appreciate you choosing to spend time with us. I'm very excited to be here today to participate in a conversation about Chicago's approach to comprehensive community development and to present together with three of our local partners some of the key findings and learnings of our efforts to date. Our story is the story of LISC as a whole and how this organization continues to reinvent itself from the inside out. It's an exciting story, and it's really why we're all here in Washington. My task today is to set the stage for our discussion. We'll spend a few minutes reviewing the key principles of the New Communities Program, or Chicago's Sustainable Communities Initiative, followed by a conversation led by our three local panelists who will share examples of how the NCP principles have been applied in their neighborhoods and some outcomes to date. Today, I am joined by, to my left, Carlos Nelson, the Executive Director of Greater Auburn Gresham Development Corporation, located on Chicago's South Side; Livia Villarreal, the Executive Director of the Reach Center, a financial opportunity center on Chicago's Southwest Side; and Rob Castaneda, Executive Director of Beyond the Ball, a sports-based youth and community development organization on the West Side. Before we begin, let's take a look at a quick video which will walk us through the last 13 years.
In the third largest city in the United States, building up some of our city's most vulnerable neighborhoods is no small task. It takes a network of players, large and small.
It's taken decades to get to a state of disinvestment in these neighborhoods.
It takes a plan.
Organizing has been a part of Chicago's DNA, perhaps since the beginning of the city.
We have to be nimble. Neighborhoods are constantly changing.
And then it takes us, LISC's New Communities Program.
It really is bottom-up development.
We work with local leaders to grow their great ideas by connecting them to the resources they need to get things done. This is our story.
By 1995 or 96, LISC in Chicago had come a long way on a housing program. But we looked at neighborhoods that had no grocery stores, still had poor schools, didn't have medical or health facilities, and so on. And we said, there's got to be more than what we're doing in terms of our approach.
The Futures Forum was an opportunity to step back and take a look at the future of community development in Chicago. It really brought together all of the key stakeholders across the city: residents, businesses, organizations, city officials, private sector. And they came and they looked at the future of community development, and they said we need to look at things a little differently than the way we have in the past. At the very first plenary session of the Futures Forum, a young fellow named Barack Obama, who was a state legislator, spoke to the assembled 200 or so people and talked about his principles of community development and laid out really the comprehensive agenda that we have been following ever since.
Out of the Futures Forum came the concept of healthy communities, an idea that community development is more than just building homes. It's building safe communities where families can live, work, and play. Community organizations and LISC began to implement this approach, beginning with 3 pilot sites, eventually expanding to 16 neighborhoods across Chicago. We called it the New Communities Program, an innovative way to help neighborhoods create partnerships and develop programs to transform their communities.
The early years of that program were individual projects that across the board were in a variety of areas. So there was a lot of new youth projects or art projects or safety projects. And what we've seen evolve over time is it's not just about building the capacity of a neighborhood to do these different individual projects, but how those projects have grown into more complex, comprehensive programming So the Elevate programming in middle schools, where you are putting in health services and solving for how kids get their physicals and how community residents access that health clinic. The diversity of after-school programming that should reinforce healthy eating habits, to connecting those parents of those children to our centers for working families so that they have the income supports needed to also maintain a healthy household.
The model that LISC provides as an intermediary and through the New Communities program is important because it brings together a number of different entities. So you're not just working with community organizations, you're also working with local political leadership, you're also working with the folks downtown at City Hall. They're bringing in corporate partners. This platform allows you to bring everybody together to work as one.
The program quickly gained momentum when neighborhood organizations released their community-generated quality of life plans, long-term goals for each community, broken down into specific short-term actions.
One of the effects of the New Communities program, I look at this and think the City of Chicago has effectively outsourced its function of community development planning, of neighborhood planning, to the New Communities program, at no cost to the City of Chicago, by the way. But it has been heavily endorsed, strongly endorsed by Mayor Daley, this program, because when he first saw these 16 plans that were released, and they weren't just theoretical plans, they were very practical plans that were ready to be, had specific steps to be implemented, he was impressed, and he recognized this and latched onto it as this is what speaks for the communities, this is the community plan.
I think what we're seeing today is really the growth of an industry, the growth of a way of doing things which is far more sophisticated and integrated than it has been at any time in the past. In the early days of the New Communities program, there were many good organizations who were working very hard to make individual projects happen. But over time, they began to link up, form partnerships, they began to work with each other, they began to link and make connections within communities so that they could create something that was even better and bigger and more impactful. And so what we've seen is this increasing level of communication and sophistication and community accountability, which has really created a dynamic force for turning around these communities.
Comprehensive development doesn't mean building a building and putting all sorts of services inside a building. It is a mindset. It is how you approach everything and understand how everything relates to everything else. If you're going to build up a neighborhood commercial area, you've got to make sure you got rooftops. If you're going to have jobs for folks, you got to make sure you're going to have good schools. If you're going to have good schools, you're going to have medical and health facilities that help take care of the kids. They all fit together. NCP is a distinct program, but it is really just a moniker on the way that we now approach all community development in Chicago. And to that extent, I think we've been terribly successful.
So by now we're all well versed in the key principles of the New Communities program, but they bear repeating. The NCP model relies on 5 core tenets that together support comprehensive community development: engage, plan, act, communicate, and repeat. The foundation of NCP is a quality of life plan developed in partnership with local stakeholders of a particular community and led by a lead agency. The first step is to engage, essentially a listening tour to build partnerships and to connect to residents. It's through these conversations that a vision begins to develop, of what the neighborhood can and should become. The topics that emerge as areas of greatest interest or concern then form the basis of the quality of life plan. Through a series of community meetings, a plan is developed which articulates the community's priorities. That plan ultimately becomes a blueprint for engagement and investment and establishes a timeline and an accountability structure. The planning process is an end in and of itself. It fosters understanding, trust, and relationships, and as Bill Taft said in Indianapolis, from Indianapolis yesterday, it provides an opportunity for healing in the neighborhood. While heavy implementation begins when the plans are complete, we act well before the ink is dry, focusing on short-term visible projects, again, to foster understanding, trust, and relationships. It's important to tell the stories of the work as it happens, as well as to highlight successes and lessons learned. Finally, repeat. The NCP methodology is not linear, but cyclical. If it works, do it again. If something hasn't worked quite well, we'll adjust and try again. Today, our program is comprehensive, it's multifaceted, and it's scaled in 16 neighborhoods. Most importantly, it is community-rooted and community-led. So after nearly 13 years of work, we can cautiously say that NCP works. But today, the world is a very, very different place than when we first started, and we are being tested daily. A tidal wave of failed mortgages is eroding our communities. Chicago has a stubbornly high homicide rate due to many factors, not the least of which is a chronic gang problem. We have high unemployment. Our high school dropout rate is about 50%, and each of these challenges is compounded by federal, state, and local budget challenges, not to mention the imminent transition at City Hall, the first in nearly 20 years, over 20 years. But there is hope. Our neighborhoods are organized, and our city has proven to be resilient. And after 13 years, lessons have been learned, and we have tested tactics at the ready. The most important thing we've done collectively is to create what we've called our neighborhood platform. The platform is a delivery system built upon a web of relationships that support multiple integrated programs and projects that address multiple or neighborhood-level challenges. It's a network through which funders and city government has been able to invest quickly and efficiently in projects and programs run by community-based organizations with assistance from LISC. What does that all mean in practice? It is the ability, and Carlos, help me out, because I'm using your program as an example. It's the ability of a lead agency to organize residents and organizations to shape a new model of community schools. It is the partnerships that allow that neighborhood to plan and implement innovative school-based programs that address the whole child, both in and out of school. It is the ability to leverage your resources and connect with the appropriate TA providers to build a health center in that school with service that's open to all members of the family, and in your case, to neighboring schools. Finally, it is documenting that process, celebrating those victories, and sharing the lessons that have been learned so we can do it all over again when the next opportunity arises. Key programs have been built upon and supported by the NCP platform, the success of which relies heavily on local leadership. Let's take a look.
Our neighborhoods are strong, resilient, and when things don't go as they should in our neighborhoods, we come together to find a solution. And behind our strategies are our leaders, Chicagoans who live and work in their communities, who understand their neighborhood's strengths and weaknesses. They come from different backgrounds, but have the same goal: to build better communities. Together, they not only plan for where they live, but plan for our city, working together to make a difference. Carlos Nelson will be the first to tell you there's no blueprint for the kind of work he does. A former engineer, Nelson quit the corporate world to become a leader in his neighborhood of Auburn Gresham.
I really work to just rebuild my community, build the people in my community, and help as a conduit for folks in the community to aspire to attain great things. At one time, if you looked at our streets, you would get the feel that it was kind of like a ghost town because you didn't see the seniors, you didn't see the young kids. People were afraid to come out. And I think because of this new communities program platform and the work of lead agencies and faith-based organizations and strong political partners, we've really been able to engage those same residents that were afraid to come out into Auburn Gresham, and now they have taken leadership roles and really have manhandled a revitalization of their own community. It's because of the youth in the community, it's because of the elders, it's seeing the faces of people smiling and looking at their community and saying, look at how far we've come. And that's what keeps me coming in every day.
Livia Villarreal is strengthening her community by helping residents make good financial decisions. She and a strong group of community partners opened a center for working families in her neighborhood of Chicago Lawn. It's a place where residents can get help with their finances, get employment support, or talk to a professional about how to save their home from foreclosure.
This wasn't a concept that we just decided to put in the community and see if it worked. This was a concept that was came out of the community, and then because of the NCP planning process and all the organizations that were involved, residents could trust us. Awareness is huge, but if you don't know where to get that information, if you don't know how to get that information, if you don't know where to go to get trusted information, how do you address those issues? Providing those services to community residents, it gives me great reward. I work, I live in the neighborhood, so I do take it very personal.
Rob Castañeda is building up his community through sports. As director of Beyond the Ball, Rob not only helps youth grow up positively in his neighborhood of Little Village, he teaches them to be community leaders. As part of LISC's Neighborhood Sports Chicago, Rob has helped grow the idea of using neighborhood streets as safe places to play, bringing some of Chicago's divided neighborhoods together to play in sports tournaments.
When you deal with youth, you look at them for their assets, not for their deficiencies. You know, a lot of times people will provide programming for youth and say, oh, these are gangbangers, or oh, these are, you know, teenage mothers. Instead of identifying those youth as, oh, you know what, this is somebody who's really creative. That's what LISC does for communities, and especially our community. They look at us as not a community full of all these deficiencies, but a community that has local strengths, and they support those strengths on a local level, and they allow us as a community to be able to address our, you know, social issues, because a lot of people have a very one-dimensional view of neighborhoods, especially what are considered as, you know, working poor neighborhoods, and that's that nobody there cares, somebody needs to come in from outside and rescue them, but really a lot of times it's just a lack of resources. When we first became familiar with the New Communities program and LISC, we had a very, very small view of what we were doing. And I think through the New Communities program, through our relationship with LISC, we get to kind of see things on a larger scale and how what we do fits in, not just in our neighborhood, but on a citywide level, on a national level. We're always passionate about our work because at the end of the day, it's about our youth and it's about our community. It's about making this a better and a safer place. But to know that the things that we're doing here can help impact other communities like ours, not only in Chicago, but also throughout the nation through that LISC network, it's a pretty amazing feeling.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Carlos Nelson. I'm the Executive Director of the Greater Auburn Gresham Development Corporation, or GAGDC. Our organization was founded in 2000 and started providing services in 2001 with a very small budget. I started volunteering with the organization in 2002, and in 2003 I became the Executive Director of the organization. At that time, our prime focus was commercial area revitalization. We had no initiatives around youth engagement, no initiatives around education, health, arts and culture, or any wide-scale, deliberate community engagement. And then along came the New Communities program. And so if there ever was a practical example of how the theory of the NCP platform works and its impact on a neighborhood and on an organization, we are it. But first, a little about the community. The Auburn Gresham community is a south side of Chicago community with a population of approximately 60,000 residents. It was a large Irish Catholic enclave. In fact, it's the community that started Chicago's St. Patrick's Day Parade. But during the turbulent 1960s and into the 1970s, the population underwent a dramatic shift from being 60,000 residents, 99% white, to 62,000 residents, 98% black by 1980. This ethnic succession had a tremendous negative impact on the main commercial corridors. In fact, our streets were empty. They were barren. There was wide-scale disinvestment, vacant and boarded up homes and storefronts, tracts and tracts of vacant commercial lots, trash and litter all over, no sit-down restaurants, banks, or stores, no vitality, nothing that really screams a vital, classic Chicago community. And then with the introduction of NCP, the organization took on quite a different approach to community work. Now before, the office was a place where our clients that we served came to us, primarily as walk-ins, other times as appointments. With NCP, we used an active approach. We went out to find and engage our clients, our businesses, residents, seniors, schools, etc. We planned with residents ways to improve their lives, their businesses, their homes, and their community. We went into action mode by using resources to initiate quick hit projects to give hope to residents and to show that we could deliver while we continued planning. We communicated our successes to the community, to the block clubs, to the city, and to just about anybody else who would listen. And we strategically market our community, the community of Auburn Gresham. Now, the NCP methodology was used to address one of the first projects undertaken as part of our NCP, or New Communities Program, Quality of Life Plan. It was an economic development strategy. Strategy 1, encourage local business ownership and generate jobs for youth and young adults. And the task was to establish a special service area on 79th Street, which is our main commercial, one of our main commercial corridors. SSA number 32 was one of the first SSAs in an African American community in the 30-year history of SSAs. In our case, the businesses wanted to create or generate some interest in marketing their businesses, maintenance and beautification of the retail district, free architectural services, safety and security. In fact, we've deemed our commercial strip a litter-free zone. And then a fifth element was the creation of the Auburn Gresham 79th Street Renaissance Festival to help promote the existing businesses, both small businesses, mom and pop businesses, and larger corporate businesses in the community, to the thousands of folks that started coming to our festival. The most notable outcome was the 79th Street Renaissance Festival. And if you're ever in Chicago, the first Saturday after Labor Day, this year it's on 9, 10, 11, please come out to 79th Street for the 79th Street Renaissance Festival. Now, most people would not necessarily associate economic development with education. But for an organization that historically had no youth engagement nor educational programming prior to the launch of NCP, the Renaissance Festival that was spawned from the creation of SSA number 32 as an economic development tool became its own marketing and volunteer recruiting engine. In fact, we became known around the community at many community schools as the organization that put on the festival, as the organization that hired the youth from the community to participate in the festival. Soon, local residents started really enjoying their community, as they, which they hadn't done in the many years of moving into Auburn Gresham in the 1960s and 70s. Then in 2007, an initiative called Integrated Services in Schools, funded by the Atlantic Philanthropies, became available through LISC Chicago. My organization was selected as part of an RFQ process, and we launched right into our NCP principles and methodology that we had begun to become experts in, or at least people thought we were experts in. Auburn Gresham's Integrated Services in Schools is now called Elevate, and Elevate was born. We selected a school partner, a brand new school to the community, which was also a strategy in our New Communities Program Quality of Life Plan. Elevate allowed us to become an organization with a strong, deliberate educational initiative. But first, we had to organize residents to discuss needs that they felt were important. Once again, we went back into engagement, then planning, and documenting the discussions and strategies, then communicating the plan and many successes that occurred, and voila. Now Elevate is an initiative centered in a school setting around educational improvements in middle schools, with a strategy of extending school engagement or school learning hours, plus improved access to health services by constructing a school-based health clinic inside of our school partner. Elevate has been a fabulous initiative for the GAGDC and has really put us on the map for our educational programming. But we looked at this successful model and decided that more schools in our community should have a focused and detailed approach to improving the educational, health, and social support mechanisms to improve the students and their families' lives or qualities of life. So we launched our schoolyard project with little funding at 2 additional schools in our community, basically a replication of many of the Elevate functions. Subsequently, a partnership with Illinois State University and their College of Education has been created to develop teachers from within our community. Now, according to the City of Chicago's Health Index, Auburn Gresham's overall quality of health ranks among the lowest in the city. Residents must leave the neighborhood to go to the hospital, and local clinics are inadequate to meet the needs. Once again, in the spirit of the New Communities program, we took to the streets with the launch of a health initiative aimed at getting the attention of local residents and bringing our services to the streets. We call it our Health Fairs on the Block. Our quality of life strategy, 7.1 in our booklet, is to upgrade access to preventative health care and education by recruiting health services providers, expanding the offerings of health fairs, and increasing awareness of nearby health centers. So twice a year, we get all types of health vendors to line the streets near 2 very busy bus lines, kind of like a sidewalk sale of services. To share information, we do blood screenings, age testing, reproductive health care and info, health insurance enrollment, farmers markets, jazzercise classes, etc., all around health and fitness. And now we have 2 major medical partners, the University of Chicago Hospitals and Access Community Health Networks, to help us initiate our programs. In all of this work, LISC NCP has allowed resources to flow, which has leveraged millions of additional resources for the community.
Thank you, Carlos. I think I need my own microphone down there. You did a much better job articulating how it is that ISIS or integrated schools and services happened at your neighborhood level than I did. So, but what you raised in their points was how you leveraged the NCP platform to be able to bring this type of service to your community. And I think, Livia, you had a similar experience with the Centers for Working Families. Please share your story.
Yeah, thank you, Keri. Good afternoon. My name is Livia Villarreal, and I have the pleasure, really the pleasure, of being the director of the Southwest Reach Center, one of the Centers for Working Families, also known as Financial Opportunity Centers in the LISC Chicago network. Currently, there are 12 centers in Chicago serving over 13,000 clients a year. The Southwest Reach Center is a division of Greater Southwest Development Corporation, and we're located in the neighborhood of Chicago Lawn, a multi-ethnic neighborhood on the southwest side of the city of Chicago, about 3 miles east of Midway Airport. Greater Southwest has been a community development agency in Chicago Lawn since 1974. We are also the lead NCP agency, and in 2004 became HUD certified as a housing counseling agency. In our neighborhood, less than 62% of families have a household income over $50,000, and almost 20% live below the poverty line. Approximately 28% of homeowners and 47% of renters spend more than 40% of their income on housing costs. The unemployment rate is almost twice that of the city of Chicago, and our community has been severely impacted by the housing crisis, with more than 1,000 judicial foreclosure sales. These are finalized foreclosure sales in our community since July of 2009. So you can really see how our neighborhood needed a center. So how did our center come about? Well, during our neighborhood's 2003 NCP planning process, the emerging CWF model fit really nicely with 3 strategic focus areas identified in our quality of life plan: housing, jobs, and healthcare. The combination of this planning process, our work as a housing counseling agency, the need for financial literacy, and really the lack of services in our community more than convinced us that this is what we wanted to do. So in 2006, we rolled up our sleeves, we embraced this new endeavor, and we set out to make it work. We started off with 0 clients, nobody. We started from scratch in 2006, and 5 years later, we provide services to about 1,200 clients a year. And we do this with a marketing budget of 0. Our clients come to us by word of mouth and by the connections and partnerships that we have created in our neighborhood through the NCP process. As other CWFs, we provide our families with 3 basic services: financial, employment, and income supports. And as a HUD certified agency, we also provide a 4th, housing counseling. All of our clients are seen by appointments, and for those receiving one-on-one services, their first point of entry is with a financial counselor. We have found that this is really an effective way to ensure clients get more than one service. We know bundling is very important, and that they receive the crucial financial services. After their session with a financial counselor, they either meet with an employment specialist or an income support specialist, and in some cases, they meet with both. What we have seen in providing these services is that the LISC network of Center for Working Family truly creates a unique entry point into the development of the NCP neighborhoods. It provides a valuable and flexible platform for us to deliver these targeted services for those mostly in need. And it is a crucial infrastructure to address issues that strike very deep in our NCP neighborhoods: unemployment, insufficient household income, poor credit, and foreclosures. So what have we done around foreclosures? What have we tried to address? Well, we all know working class neighborhoods in Chicago and across the nation continue to be clobbered by foreclosures as unemployment increases and many mortgage lenders fail to modify all these unaffordable loans. In our neighborhood, Greater Southwest has been working around housing issues since the late 1980s. We've been doing it a long time, and when we thought we were really finally making progress, the housing market collapsed, and we were all left with the challenge on how to address this resulting devastation. With a generous grant from the MacArthur Foundation, we partnered with 2 local agencies, and we established the Keep Our Homes campaign to do 2 things. 1, build awareness in our community regarding the foreclosure issue and the assistance available, and 2, work with banks to try and find solutions to the problem. We were very successful with the former, but not the latter. At the center, we also implemented a foreclosure triage system to better assess those in immediate need and our ability to help them. We have also partnered with another social service agency in our neighborhood, and today we provide a free monthly legal clinic where residents can meet with pro bono attorneys and address legal issues around housing, consumer law, and family law. So today, all of our centers have seen an increase, really an increase, due to the economic downturn and foreclosure crisis and the clients that we see. In response, we have solidified. We have gotten stronger. Each site has secured new or additional resources to support the full complement of services, and in some cases, add new services like we have. Most recently, LISC Chicago received a Broadband Technology Opportunity Grant to launch the Smart Communities program, a collaboration of 5 communities, including Carlos, Auburn Gresham, who have established a platform for delivering digital literacy services to residents in all 5 neighborhoods. Thanks to Smart Communities, we now have a family net center where residents can come, use computers, and obtain internet and software training. We are also proud to be recipients of a share of federal dollars from the LISC Social Innovation Fund. This will allow us to continue providing crucial services, empowering, transforming, and building the economic foundations of our families. At the beginning, I mentioned how our CWF is one of 12 in the LISC Chicago network. I really want to emphasize that we are more than just a center in the network. It's really a truly collaborative effort. Since the inception of the model in Chicago 5 years ago, we all share best practices, what works, what doesn't work. And right in the middle of it has been our best partnership, LISC Chicago. Without their assistance, we wouldn't be where we are today. I really mean that. They have really helped us become better at what we do. They provided us with the flexibility to implement our programs, and for that, all of our neighborhoods, all of our clients are truly grateful.
Livia, thank you. Libby, you spent a lot of time talking about the financial health of a family, but what about the social and emotional health of a family? And what really does it mean to say sports-based youth and community development? Rob?
Good afternoon. My name is Rob Castaneda. I'm the Executive Director of Beyond the Ball, which is located on the west side of Chicago in the Little Village community. Primarily, Beyond the Ball originally started focusing on sports-based youth development, but it was through the actually the New Communities Program process through LISC Chicago that our sports-based community building work has become globally recognized. And before I start talking about the sports-based community building work, I just kind of want to share with you a little bit about the community. Again, Little Village is located on the west side of Chicago, and we have over 100,000 residents in about 2 square miles. We're the densest community in the city of Chicago. We're the youngest community in the city of Chicago. We have over 21,000, or over 40,000 youth under the age of 21. And you tie that to the other statistic we're known for, and that's the least amount of green space per capita. That leaves a lot of kids in the street looking for recreation, which has become like, you know, an incubator for gang activity. Chicago is a violent city right now. But our community isn't at all about negative things. 95% of the community is Latino, mostly of Mexican descent. We have a large immigrant population. We have a thriving cultural center, right? We have a very vibrant small business community. To the south, the west, and the east, we're actually bordered by industrial corridors. To the north is our neighbor, North Lawndale, which is 98% African American. And like many other working poor neighborhoods in Chicago, youth from the two communities stay segregated throughout elementary and middle schools. But in high schools, they share community high schools, and that tends to create some racial tension and territorial tensions that sometimes spill outside of the school. Adding to the complexity of racial boundaries and gang boundaries in Chicago. According to the Department of Justice, there's over 1 million gang members in the United States, and over 100,000 of them live in Chicago. Gang violence has gripped our communities for decades, resulting in high rates of violence, 50% graduation rates in community schools, devastation of community play spaces, and minimal access to those spaces. In Little Village, due to gang boundaries, only a small portion of the neighborhood gets access to the local park. Little Village youth experience obesity rates that are twice as high as the national average. And it was my experience with gangs, along with Beyond the Ball's co-founder, my wife Amy, who's here today, that led us into the work of sports-based community development. Back in 1998, my wife's a Chicago public school teacher, and 1998 we had decided that wherever she was going to teach, that's where we wanted to be involved in the neighborhood. So it was actually in Chicago, we just had a really big blizzard. I think a lot of people got big blizzards, if you know, who didn't, right? But our last big one was back in '98, and so we wouldn't happen to notice that we, looked to buy a house at the same time, and we found a nice little house in a quiet corner in Little Village, and it was a foreclosure. And we ended up buying that, moving in, and we realized something, wanting to be involved in the school. And both of us kind of growing up in the city and loving sports, being involved with like Little League, gymnastics, soccer, volleyball, basketball. My first love's always been basketball. So when there was a need in the school for basketball coaches, it was natural for us to want to volunteer to do that. And so we did, and very quickly we started noticing, kids saying, "Hey, coach, can I stay late after practice today, or can I do my homework?" Because right now the gang's trying to recruit me, or the gang's harassing me, and being like typical adults, like I grew up in the city, and about gangs, and you leave them alone, they leave you alone type deal. We would be like, "Hey, just get your education, do what's right, don't get caught up with what the gangs are doing out there, just make the right decisions." And after living in the neighborhood for a year, the gang found out that we would have like anywhere from like 5 to like 50 gangbangers outside of our house, gangbanging. I'm talking about shootings, seeing people get shot, throwing bottlings, brickings, like rammings, like people using cars as weapons. And it was just really crazy, right? Because even though I grew up in the cities, like you're not used to seeing like gangbanging that hard. And so, you know, after living there for a year, the gang found out that we were calling the police on them when they were out there, and in retaliation, they set our house on fire. And so our immediate reaction was, you know, well, let's get out of here. You know, this isn't worth it. Your parents are like, get out of there. Just leave all your stuff there. We'll help you buy new stuff. But you know what? The girls' basketball team came over, and you know, they were sharing some tears of support with their coach, my wife, and some words of encouragement. And they were encouraging us not to give in to gang intimidation and not to leave the community. And at that night after they left, you know, our initial response, you know, had up to that point been, let's get out of here. But then after they left, we were like, you know, what do you think? I don't know, what do you think? And after a lot of discussion and prayer, we decided to stay in our home. And our house would again get set on fire a couple weeks later, and the gang came back a third time, threw a bottle through the window while yelling that they were going to kill us for calling the police. But you know, the community ended up rallying around us. The police ended up catching the guys involved, and it was a great example of community coming together. To be honest with you, deciding to stay in the neighborhood was the easy decision, right? The hard decision was, okay, now that we decided to stay, what are we going to do to help the kids we work with not enter in this lifestyle of like violence that's so prevalent? And so from 2000 to 2005, we continued to run, do what we were doing. My wife was teaching, we were volunteer coaching, and we were running like, you know, a sports program, a lot of basketball. Kids love basketball in our neighborhood. And so just really coming up with like very good sports-based youth development models, a lot of youth-led programming. We had over 200 guys right from the neighborhood by 2005 coming through on a regular basis, after school, summers, weeknights, and we created a really positive youth culture. But in 2005, we actually were introduced to this thing called New Communities Program, right? There was this lead agency in our community in LISC, Chicago, and they're like, hey, you know, we're doing this thing in the neighborhood, and you know, we're gonna have this quality of life plan, and everybody in the neighborhood's talking about what we want the neighborhood to look like. You know, you should come check it out. And so we did. And it really was an eye-opening experience for us, right? Up to this time, we had been working in isolation. For all we knew, we were the only ones working with youth in the neighborhood, right? And it had been 5 years, right? And so when we went to the meetings and seeing all the different people in the neighborhood and all the different like, businesses and organizations trying to make the neighborhood a better place and coming up with that plan, it was a real empowering experience for us. And we could kind of see how the work that we were doing kind of fit into that plan as overall. And two of the big needs in the community, in the quality of life plan, was the need for safe play spaces and access to those spaces. And so that first year, one of the other NCP communities in the city was doing this like thing called Hoops in the Hood. And it was like, you know, because they had similar neighborhood challenges. And so what they were doing is shutting down the street and encouraging kids to encouraging kids to come out and play in the street, and then moving that tournament throughout the neighborhood. And so our neighborhood's like, yeah, you know what, let's try to do that. And so we did. And that first summer, we engaged over 200 youth in the neighborhood, and then being very intentional, right, to cross like the gang boundaries, the racial boundaries, and just kind of the neighborhood taking, you know, control, even if it was one night a week of that space. So through the NCP process, which would be engaging, planning, acting, communicating, and repeating, we kept doing this, you know, Hoops in the Hood every year. And then, you know, people would get the idea of using this same type of, you know, sports for reclaiming open space ideas, and we would just do it, you know, find out what we could do better and repeat. And every time we repeated, you know, we would change it a little around to learn from our mistakes. Since 2005 to today, right? This idea of Hoops in the Hood, or using, you know, sports to reclaim open spaces or for community engagement, it's expanded into 14 of the NCP neighborhoods in Chicago. And has led to further like citywide initiatives, right, where we're not just doing Hoops in the Hood, but we're doing like, you know, intentional projects where we're targeting historically known spaces for like gang violence. And now instead of those being isolated spaces, you got like 300 to 700 community residents out there every week engaging in community and in playing and being healthy. So over the last 15 years, over the last 5 years, this NCP network has actually formalized a collaboration around sports that we call Neighborhood Sports Chicago, and we've engaged over 15,000 youth throughout the city to date. So I'm very grateful to be here in Washington, and I want to, I know a lot of places like the NCP thing is new. Some people are funders, some people are, everybody wears a different hat. And thank you all for being here. I just want to make a couple of things very clear. That the NCP model that LISC Chicago uses and the way that LISC Chicago does business, I fully support that from a neighborhood level, right? A lot of people have one-dimensional views of our neighborhoods, and they think that they need to go in and fix something. But through this model, right, LISC listens to what the community wants and needs, and then helps empower our communities to actually do those things. And these, folks up here, this isn't the first time we've seen each other, right? We've got this very strong, like, citywide coalition collaboration where we're constantly learning from each other. And then I also want to make it very clear, sports. Sports is not a bad word. Everybody hear that? Sports is not a bad word. We're very intentional about sports, right? There's sports for sports' sake, and there's sports for community engagement and community building. And sports is an amazing vehicle. Everybody and their mother will tell you sports, my son's sports or sports for me, they did, taught me confidence and this and that. But I want to say that sports brings communities together like, nothing you've ever seen. And saying that out of experience because I've seen it. I just want to share that with you. And lastly, sports is a very powerful tool for social inclusion. It's a way to get, people who have been kind of disenfranchised and not really engaged in our society to be active participants and opens up lots of opportunities for leadership and engagement.
Thank you. Well, I do want to open the floor up for questions. If I may just maybe pose one question to each of you, and I'll start with Rob. Pretend I'm a funder. Pretend I'm LISC. Okay. And you come to me and you say, I have this great idea and I want to use sports as a tool to change, my neighborhood. How do you measure success? What are your outcomes and how do you look at that?
It's like there's two sets of outcomes, right? There's the things that you see with your eyes and the things that people want to see on paper. For the things that we see with our eyes and that we live, success to us, a big part of what we do is getting our kids to realize that they're part of the solution for neighborhood challenges. And a lot of, programs will be like, okay, we need to get these kids, use our program to get these kids to get an education so they can get out of those neighborhoods that they live in. For us, it's all about our kids being a part of something that's positive in our neighborhood. So when they get their education, they're like, oh, I'm going back home because, this is my family. And you want to be back with your family. And so for us, like to see guys graduating, from college with their master's degrees and coming back to the neighborhood to be teachers and to help out with the sports programming. We have guys who are accountants for other local nonprofits who come up through our programming. We have, 5-year-olds, because we go from 5 to post-high school. And we have 5-year-olds who say, when I grow up, I want to be a beyond the ball coach. When I grow up, I want to be, and so those things, those are ways that we measure success with our eyes on paper, right? We usually look at like attendance rates. Like a lot of programs like ours, 70% attendance looks like a good, thing, but we have like in the 90% attendance rates and just other things like that that we look at for like tracking and things.
Thank you. Thank you. And, Livia, your neighborhood has probably been hit the hardest by the foreclosure crisis, at least in Chicago. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the impact of the Centers for Working Families during this time.
Sure, Keri. None of us could have predicted this economic crisis or where our neighborhood would be. So it was very fortunate that we went through the NCP planning process and saw that we needed these services. I live in the neighborhood, And there was nowhere before this Center for Working Families where anyone could go to get any type of services about getting a resume, doing a budget, pulling a credit report, having questions about home ownership. I mean, this is crucial, and there was nothing in our neighborhood before this Center for Working Families. So it was very fortunate to us that we identified the lack of these services. The neighborhood was ripe for the need, and the center was there at the right time, right when we needed it. We couldn't have predicted what had happened. But you know, today, like I said, we started off from nothing, and we service a lot of families in our neighborhood. And we see families, I mean, families that come in like Maria and Thompson. I mean, these are actual clients who come to our center, and they came in because they needed a medical card for their baby, their 4-month-old baby, just a medical card. And they met with our financial counselor, and we discovered that, guess what, they were in foreclosure. Maria, the wife, because of the birth of their son, she had to be out of work. And then when she went back to work, her husband was laid off, so they fell behind on their mortgage. And our counselors worked with them. We were able to modify their loan, save them $300 a month. $300 is a huge amount for working families in our neighborhood. And they got that medical card. They didn't have to worry about health care for their son. I mean, that's what really motivates us, helping these families. That's the impact we see every day. We just started the Smart Communities program. And, you know, we all take the internet. We all know the internet, right? We all take it for granted. People come to our center, they don't even have an email address. I mean, it's rewarding to see a mother who has a son overseas, and this is the first time that she emails him. I mean, in our center, she was thrilled that she was able to email her son who's overseas, and now, you know, she has a way to communicate. So it's been huge, the impact that we see in our community.
I hadn't heard that story about the email yet. You're going to get me going. And finally, one question, Carlos, for you. Could you please tell us a little bit about what the impact has been for your organization participating in NCP, both as an organization and sort of how you approach the work in your neighborhood?
Certainly. Well, as I mentioned, I was an engineer in corporate America, making a lot of money, and decided I wanted to do something that really captured my imagination, and I think really hit to what my purpose, my role in life is, and that's helping my people, helping my community. When I started volunteering with the organization, with, as I mentioned, a budget of less than $100,000 at the time, we really struggled on finding resources. We knew that we needed to help the commercial district, help with revitalizing the commercial stretch, bringing back businesses to the community. Our housing stock had really weathered the storms. The folks that moved into the community during the 60s and 70s really were strong community builders, if you will. Brick bungalows and brick two-flats, I think there were pictures shown. But it was the disinvestment on our commercial streets that really hit us very hard, and of course being overwhelmed by drugs and gangs, especially during the crack epidemic. So this organization at the time, $100,000 budget, the executive director and the part-time staffers left me, and I took the role of executive director. When the copier broke, I had to put in a trouble ticket for the IT department and turn my head around. But nonetheless, NCP came approximately a year later and really became not only a blueprint for comprehensive community development, but also a on-the-job training component for Carlos Nelson. And the individuals that I started hiring all started as volunteers, all started with that same passion. They were all from the community, that knew the community, knew the history, and from that point became paid staffers. And so we NCP kind of helped grow the organization and teach us what it really meant to engage residents in the community. And not with the purpose specifically on housing or specifically on economic development or education, but really a broad brush opportunity. And thankfully, LISC, with funds from the MacArthur Foundation and others, allowed us to be comprehensive in our engagement, in our planning process, working with the residents. I mean, literally, when you see me say, ground up community development, that's exactly what it is. When you engage 500 plus residents from Mr. and Mrs. Jones and Ms. Smith, and who'd been in the community for 50 years and were afraid to come out, and they were actually planning their future with little kids and their parents from the local schools and clergy from the community. It really is just a very warm sensation. And then when you bind this plan, and you say, okay, this is what we're going to do. It's not as dramatic as Joshua waiting on Moses to come out of the mountain, but it is. I mean, it's all right. I see where most of us we should go on Sunday, obviously, or Saturday. But nonetheless, I mean, this really was, and our quality of life plan is our blueprint, and it's not just about one singular organization developing, getting the resources and leading every initiative, but really building partnerships and collaborations and corroborating around this singular goal of improving the quality of life of our residents.
Thank you. Yes, I do need to go to that place on Sunday more often. With that,
let me mention we are an apolitical, non-faith-based organization.
Amen. On that note, I'd like to perhaps invite the audience to ask some questions of our panelists, if there are any.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'm Kalima Rose with PolicyLink, and congratulations for your amazing work.
Thank you.
I'm wondering if you know about the Sustainable Communities Planning grants that HUD and the Department of Transportation and the Environmental Protection Agency have awarded to the Chicago region, and if that planning process has any bearing on the work that you're doing at the neighborhood level.
Well, I will say that we work closely, we work with the Chicago metropolitan area for planning. And oddly enough, or coincidentally, it is around improved transportation. And in our case, it is transit-oriented development, which has an overlaying theme of environmental awareness. And thanks once again, and I'm not here to toot the horn of the NCP platform, but LISC has allowed us to incorporate transit-oriented development into our quality of life plan. And so for us, we are working, now I don't know specifically who the resources are, where those funds are going, but certainly through CMAP, through acronym heaven, MCIC, working with federal agencies, CTA, Chicago
Transit Authority.
Thank you. Metropolitan Transit Authority as well, Regional Transit Authority, RTA. We are involved very heavily in utilizing those funds for planning.
So I'm wondering if you could just give a little advice, right? Like these grants are supposed to ensure community engagement and that social equity organizations are represented in the planning and governance. And it seems to me that a neighborhood like yours that has a plan in hand could really insert that plan into the region's plan to draw down the resources that you want. But imagine a neighborhood 5 years before where you are right now or something. So I'm just wondering if you could reflect on what it takes for a neighborhood that is trying to reinvest in itself to meaningfully participate in a regional plan, and what you might expect to get out of it at the end, so we can sort of translate it to these bigger initiatives. Thank you.
Sure. Once again, I would say in the case of for agencies like Illinois Department of Transportation or whatever it is, that when you utilize a platform like NCP, which has a lead agency, so basically, I mean, it's an entity that's on the ground representing the community. Now, that organization, you know, can be a coalition of other community-based organizations, and I think that really is the approach to. Instead of it being a top-down, so you have all these transportation agencies, and whether it's federal, state, or city, really telling these communities what this master plan is, you incorporate a community-based organization or coalition to really sit at the table with these agencies and then begin the planning. And if those agencies aren't at a point in their life cycle where they can lead such discussions, then resources need to be put in place to help develop those organizations to do that, technical assistance, so organizational capacity.
Hi, I'm Tina Brooks. I'm the director for the Department of Housing and Community Development in Massachusetts. And Livia, I did go and see your neighborhood about a year or so ago, and the Family Center program was powerful. It was really wonderful to see the services brought to people in the community, so they don't have to go out and chase it, chase it down among a number of different offices. But all of you talked about different kinds of responses that were important for your communities. But they were all based in planning. So I guess it's a little bit of another planning question. How do you battle planning fatigue at the neighborhood level? You know, these communities, everything always starts with a plan. People ask a lot of residents with not a lot of discretionary time. And so how did you see that challenge? And when did you know you got the right kind of input so that you'd have a meaningful program as a result?
Maybe I can ask Rob to take this.
Sure.
To address how. Let me ask Rob to take this as an example of how planning isn't always led by one entity in a neighborhood.
Yeah. So it is a lot of planning, first of all, and planning can only be overwhelming when your plans lead to nothing. Right. And I think, you know, you take like the methodology that is used for NCP. Originally it was a methodology that we just used for planning in our neighborhood. But then as you know, for like, for instance, for me, for sports is a big deal, right? And it's our life's work. My wife was actually getting her, you know, finishing her PhD in curriculum studies with the emphasis in sports-based, you know, community building. But the whole idea of using that same process to engage other people with common interests, so, you know, starting on a local level and then moving out from that. So again, another thing that we do, we have early action projects, right? You know, you have a plan, and you might have this, like, you know, 2-year, 3-year, 5-year plan, but you do something early that anybody who is a stakeholder or early investor can kind of share your a small success with. And I'll give you a perfect example. For the Neighborhood Sports Chicago, one of the first things we ever did, Chicago was trying to get the Olympics for 2016. And so one of the things we did was coordinate this citywide sports tournament for, you know, youth all over the city, and we had picked 4 different locations in 4 of this, you know, 16 different NCP neighborhoods. And that was an early action project, right? All the neighborhoods kind of worked together to put off this thing for all of our kids. It was an amazing event with, you know, thousands of youth served in the 1 week. And it made everybody be like, wait, you know, this is powerful. There's substance to this. You know, let's continue to come to the table and make this better. So just that methodology, just reusing it and that refining of it.
Thank you. So I guess what I would add to that is that, you know, in each of these quality of life plans, there is that work plan, if you will, in the back. There's an accountability infrastructure, and there are organizations who take responsibility for leading certain pieces. So when opportunities come along, like broadband technology, like Centers for Working Family, like a community school model, it's not necessarily, you can point back to that one place and say, this organization had a deep interest in cultivating this and growing this, and they then broaden really the partnerships and the relationships, adding new people to the equation. And what we found is over and over, what really happens is this network in each neighborhood and across the neighborhoods continues to grow and flourish because of this very simple methodology, engage, plan, and it continues to work. And again, we've seen it as a way to, as I said, really build and strengthen more and more partnerships. So.
Hi, thank you for your comments and inspiring stories. Clearly, the three of you have been important catalysts in the revitalization efforts in your communities. And it seems the other important ingredient has been that there have been residents on the ground who have been ready to be partners in this work and take on the work themselves. What would your suggestions or recommendations be in a community, how to get this work started in a community where there aren't such people on the ground, where there are no community-based organizations, no apparent emerging leaders within the citizenry, sort of starting from square one, so sort of the step before the work that you've been talking about?
That's an excellent question, and I think, Livia, if you don't mind
Sure.
talking about how Chicago Lawn approached this when they were first kicking off planning.
Well, you know, in Chicago Lawn, we do have Greater Southwest Development Corporation, and we've had other agencies. I mean, I know if there are neighborhoods around there, there has to be somebody. There's got to be somebody in that neighborhood who is some type of a leader or volunteer. I live in my community. I've been there 21 years, and I volunteered in our school. And when we did our planning process, the thing that I really liked the most was that we were able to bring everybody in, and not just leaders, but we brought in the business sector. We brought in principals from the school. So even if there aren't any of those leaders or community-based organizations, there has to be some businesses in your communities. There has to be some schools in your communities. And pastors, we brought pastors from the church. There's got to be some type of religious organizations in your community. Starting off with them is a good way of doing it because they all have a stake in your neighborhood. The NCP process that we did wasn't just based around the community organizations. We brought everybody from all these different sectors, and we were fortunate that we had a community-based organization. So, I mean, that would be one of my suggestions, is to bring those type of sectors in.
Yeah, I'd like to just real quick, I'm sorry, add something in regards to Livia's community. Well, first of all, identifying what a leader is, and that was one of the key aspects of Greater Southwest Development Corporation and SWAP, the acronym Southwest Organizing Project. Thank you. Was really, you know, what makes, you know, what is a leader? And so maybe it's not an individual or an entity that has a website, right, you know, or an email address. You know, for them it was a leader. A leader was someone who could reach out and have one, two, or three other people listen to them and follow them to this place. And so a leader certainly is so you really have to define, you know, what leader is. And if you find if there's, you know, once again, Mrs. Jones, and she's a leader, she has a bridge tournament or a, you know, bid whisk tournament then let's go to Mrs. Jones and engage Mrs. Jones and have Mrs. Jones reach out to her 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever that group is. And so you really have, in most communities, you have just folks that are organically leaders by virtue of the fact that they have folks that listen to them and will follow them and influence them, exactly. So that was a key aspect for Greater Southwest Development Corp. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Ellen Kite, and I'm from the Pittsburgh Partnership for Neighborhood Development, the LISC office in Pittsburgh. And actually, I was going to ask a similar question to the one that was just asked. We're working in one neighborhood where there's huge need, not too many community-based organizations, but there is a fledgling organization made up of volunteers, similar to what you were talking about, Carlos. And we're starting in on the quality of life planning process, but or contemplating beginning it in this particular neighborhood, but wondering whether the organization that has started to form, that is a collaboration of a number of neighborhoods all together, is quite nascent, and it would be playing that lead role. And we were kind of wondering whether you wait to do the quality of life planning until such time as this nascent organization gets a little bit stronger, or do you do it at the same time? And Carlos, your experience with that would really be helpful.
There you go, Livia. That is an excellent question. My organization was, as I mentioned, very young, and NCP coming around a year or 2 years after we were providing services. I don't think organizationally we were at a place that we could command a group of folks in a room and begin this ground up planning process. That is where you turn to the powers that be in the community, whether it's the elected officials, strong faith-based partners, or when I say strong, I mean whatever strong means to you. And so I would say that the organization, the lead organization, once this coalition is formed, really has to be, has to have that organizational capacity to be able to guide and direct a planning process. And the key is for the organization not to say, this is our plan, that this is the community's plan. And if you look at the quality of life plan for Auburn Gresham, we just helped really organize and engage the residents. It is the plan of the residents, and you make the residents feel that, know that, pictures, quotes, whatever, whatever things, tactics are effective.
Can I have that microphone?
Did I? Was that? Okay.
If I could maybe just add one other thing to that. I mean, when we were given the honor of expanding our demonstration program from 3 to 16 neighborhoods, one of the things that our leaders were very intentional about is sort of testing this methodology in a number of different environments. So there were several neighborhoods where there were organizations that were very nascent, 1 or 2 years old. In some cases, there was no neighborhood organization at all. And I think two things. One of the points that Carlos made, it's very important to have a champion in that neighborhood for that organization. In one case, it was Alderman Preckwinkle, who's now the Cook County president. But she really had the ability to bring people together for those early meetings around the planning, et cetera. And then the second thing I would say that was critical in this particular case, and this is not to toot the horn of LISC per se, but of our NCP director, Susana Vasquez, she essentially became de facto staff. She worked with them very, very closely. She was their sounding board. She was their technical advisor. She helped build infrastructure around the organization itself. And I think it really did lead to not only a successful planning process, but it helped to birth an incredible organization that's doing amazing stuff in that neighborhood now. Excuse me.
Good afternoon to our fine set of panelists. My name is Owen Sargent, National LISC, New York. Very nice to see you. Quick questions for the gentleman to my right. You spoke about sports being a panacea or a cure in the community in which you live, and you touched about the Hispanic youth and the black youth, but you didn't mention how is the relationship today. So I'd like you to give us such a forecast on that relationship as it exists today.
So, understanding that in our community, the conflict really isn't mostly about black and brown. It's brown on brown and black on black. In high school, there's tensions. But so in what we do with our programming, it's about building not just racial crossing those racial divides, but just even community divides. And, you know, we have kids who grew up playing basketball together as like middle schoolers, high schoolers, who are now from like different parts of the neighborhood, whether it be the black side or the brown side or the east side or the west side, now playing like in men's leagues together. You know, we have kids who, you know, you can, you know, when they go to high school, it's like, these aren't strangers. These are people that I've known throughout the summer, seeing them at different events, and it's no longer my enemy because you come from there. It's, oh no, he's pretty cool. That's, you know, we get stories all the time about kids saying, hey, you know, so-and-so was going to jump on so-and-so, but I told him, no, he's good, leave him alone, that, you know, I know him. And you know, is it all gone? No, it's not. You know, we still have, Chicago's still a violent city. You know, our homicide rate's down, but, you know, more kids got shot last year than in a long time. I guess you could say we're just giving them a better reason to live, so they, you know, they stick around. But yeah, so the thing is being intentional though, and being conscious, right, about those things, about developing programming that is bringing those folks together, whether it be racial or whether it be parts of the neighborhood. That's where it's got to start. And unfortunately, you know, these things don't happen in schools. You know, schools are focusing on scores, on reading, on math, really not relationship. And that's really what our kids need. And that's what sports do, is they give kids the opportunity to develop these relationships with caring adults.
I now know what it feels like to be at the Academy Awards, because Liz Hale's in the back going 5, 4, 3. So one more question, or maybe two, if Liz gives us that. So.
I think this is a relatively short question. I'm Ellen McCarthy from the Local Advisory Council for LISC DC, and I was curious, many of the services that you've spoken about providing, employment, housing counseling, sports, are programs that would, in many cases, be delivered by municipal agencies. Do you get any funding from them? Have you had issues of turf with them? And if you don't get funding from them, how do you get ongoing operating funding to pay for some of those services?
We write proposals, we write proposals, we write proposals. At our center, we don't receive any money from the City of Chicago. As a HUD certified counseling agency, we do get some money from HUD, which has been declining throughout the years. Even with this whole foreclosure crisis, we would have thought there would have been more money for it, but they did give a little bit for foreclosure, but it has been dwindling. The good thing I want to say is that because the model, the CWF model, started about 5 years ago, it's become a proven model. 5 years ago, I wouldn't have been able to go to a funder and say, hey, fund this model. You know, we do all this wonderful service, and we're going to help people do their budgets and look at their credit reports. It wouldn't have happened. Today, because we've proven that it works and that it does help families with their financial foundations, I'm able to go to funders and say, look, it works. We've proven ourselves. And we're getting a little bit extra help from private foundations where we weren't getting that, you know, 2 or 3 years ago at all. So I know the money is dwindling on the private foundation side, but fortunately they've looked at the model and they're willing to believe in it and fund it.
Sorry, I'll just do one quick follow-up thing regarding the turf question. 2 quick things, particularly around the youth sports. Chicago Park District is basically broke like the rest of the city, and so they are eager for community organizations to step up and play this role, number one. And number two, recently, every year we have a workshop, the Hoops in the Hood Technical Assistance Workshop, to be able to sort of share sort of how the program works that Rob facilitates. And interestingly enough, half of our audience members this past January were members of the Chicago Park District. So in terms of turf wars, I mean, I think that there's a real need and interest in collaborating, certainly, around this issue.
I'll be real brief. Was one of my questions. My name is Neil Myers. I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I run a small CDC in the East End. But I'm curious, Rob, about your push on sports, because I think we have so much violence across our country, and particularly in a lot of our neighborhoods, particularly in urban neighborhoods. But I never heard such a program as yours, and you spoke so eloquently about that. I was curious about your staffing and the hours of operations, and funding was one of my questions, and how do you keep your doors open? And then how do you keep the kids involved and stay focused, because I think that's a model we should talk about across our country. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. Staffing, I mean, up until a year and a half ago, there was no staff. It was all volunteer, right? So this is something that we were doing for 9-10 years, just because there was a need and because you get the buy-in. I'll tell you what, one of the hardest thing to do is get volunteers to work with youth who are considered, right, whatever you want to call it, at risk or gang involved or at risk to be gang involved. And what we found is that some of our most committed volunteers are our young people, right? When they buy into what you're doing, they're there, rain or shine. They're there. It's their family. It's the family that they don't have, and so we have lots of kids growing up in this. And you're right. It is something that we need to address. A lot of people do sports for the sake of advancing sports, but sports is a tremendous tool to be used for communal change. And I'd be more than happy to talk with you and some stuff afterwards. But I know we're getting the cue, so.
You can hear the orchestra playing now. We're getting pushed off the stage. So thank you all very, very much for participating in today's discussion.